Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm your host, Mansa Musa. One of the foundations of democracy is equal representation under the law. In the modern world, supposedly, no one is above the rule of law. Not CEO, a wealthy corporation, not even current and former presidents. But of course, here in America, United States, the realities of our so-called criminal injustice system are constantly reminding us that equality before the law is a dream that only exists on paper, not in practice. Just look at what's happening right now with the indictment of billionaire former President Donald Trump. And compare that to the nightmare that poor black and brown people are living through every day on Rikers Island in New York. Trump was already indicted by a Manhattan grand jury and is facing 34 felony charges in New York for alleged crimes committed during his 2016 presidential campaign. Now Trump is also facing federal indictments with 37 felony counts related to mishandling of classified documents, obstructing justice, and making false statements. All the while, Trump is campaigning for his 2024 election run. He's fundraising, he's enjoying his freedom, and he's running his mouth on every media outlet that will give him a platform. At the same time, the majority of people being held captive in the notorious Rikers Island Jail in New York have had their freedom taken away, even though they haven't been convicted of any crime. In February of 2022, the Vera Institute of Justice reported that of the 5,548 people detained in the New York City jails, including on Rikers Island and the boat, 82%, 4,487 people had not been convicted of a crime. Listen, equality before the law in America does not exist. And that's what we're going to talk about today with our guest, Dyjuan Tatro. Dyjuan is a formerly incarcerated legal reform advocate and strategist who is now a senior advisor for strategic outreach on the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee. Dyjuan, thank you for joining us today on Rattling the Bars.
Really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And Dyjuan, as you seen our outline, what we're going to try to do is educate our audience on understanding how the system that we now look at, when we talk about the criminal system, and what more notably is, when I look at it, I call it the criminal injustice system. We want to talk about how this system is not fair. We say that justice is blind, but reality is justice is only blind when it comes to people that have money. Justice got 20/20 vision when it comes to poor and oppressed people. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started. We gave a brief overview of who you are, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, and I'm eager to dive in. But I would say my name is Dyjuan Tatro. I'm an alumni of the Barred Prison Initiative in New York. Some people may not know what that is, but it's one of the foremost college and prison programs in the country. And our alum work all over the criminal justice space, not only in New York, but nationally, doing amazing things, mostly, working back in their communities to alleviate the conditions and circumstances that led to their incarceration in the first place. And so I spent 12 years in prison and spent the last 6 years working in politics at the nexus of criminal justice and narrative change.
Okay, now look, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump, former president of the United States, has been indicted on 37-count indictment, felonies now. Under felonies, most felonies are punishable when you convicted of them 10 or more years or better, or in some cases, the death penalty or life. Why do you think Donald Trump has been given basically red carpet treatment when it comes to this whole process? And for full disclosure, you yourself have been incarcerated, so you can attest to like some of the things that go on to in terms of like when people are charged with felonies and how they're treated compared to how Donald Trump is treated.
Yeah, just to refer back, to your opening, there's this idea that we have a fair justice system in this country. And I think anyone who pays attention to what happens in our courtrooms, who police arrest and don't arrest, know that we do not. Some people find it helpful to say that, we have two systems of justice in America, one for white people, one for everyone else, or one for rich people and one for everyone else. I actually don't take that view, right? We have one system of justice, which the primary function of which is to incarcerate and oppress primarily Black and brown people to the benefit of wealthy elites as well as privileged white individuals, right? And so we have one system that's doing exactly what it is meant to be doing, right? The same system that will coddle Donald Trump after he sought to overturn a legal and fair election on January 6th, also put Crystal Mason in prison for 5 years for mistakenly casting a provisional ballot as someone who had a felony conviction, right? And so it is one system operating exactly as we should expect it to be, which is, deeply rooted in slavery. Policing in this country is deeply rooted in slave catching. And so we shouldn't be surprised about this differential justice per se, or the type of treatment that someone like Donald Trump receives from the system.
And you know that hypocrisy, right? Because speak on the felony aspect of and in terms of educating our audience on when we say felonies, what exactly do that mean in the criminal justice parlance?
Yeah, so generally when we're talking about a felony, we're talking about what we could call a serious crime. That doesn't mean a crime that has that doesn't mean a crime of a person, right? That doesn't mean that somebody has necessarily been harmed, right? And I think that's one of the common relations of the term. But we are talking about a serious crime that will lead to someone being sentenced to time in either state or federal prison.
Right. And now Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, has a 37 count indictment, and he's charged with violation of the Espionage Act. Now, the Espionage Act came into existence in the early 1900s. I think under Woodrow Wilson's administration, and since the implementation of this act, they have actually executed people under the act. But now Donald Trump is being charged with taking classified documents to his house, showing these classified documents to his different people that he wanted to, telling his aide to hide the documents from the federal government, which is obstruction of justice. And under these circumstances, do you think that he should have been given the red carpet treatment based on which is evident because they got all the documents out his house, and it's evidence everything that been outlined by the media is not a falsification. This is actually a reality that exists. You think he should have got the red carpet treatment?
Absolutely not, right? Donald Trump's flagrant disregard for the law and national security has been egregious. Not only did he break the law, but he has also, at several points in the investigation, attempted to subvert that investigation and evade the FBI and the Department of Justice and their ability to recover those documents, right? And so his treatment, goes to this fundamental piece of the conversation that we're having, is that you have this system that is set up to allow certain individuals like Donald Trump the presumption of innocence that allows them to walk out of a courtroom and remain at home with their family while they fight their course. their case. They can meet with their lawyers every day. Whereas the average Black or brown person in this country who's going through the criminal justice system is a radically different experience, right? They are put in handcuffs. They are put on buses. They are trafficked around from jail to courthouse. They are trapped inside cages for 24, 72, 168 hours without running water, sleeping on the floor, stacked on top of each other, right? Inability to make a phone call to anyone, right? Let alone your family or your lawyer. Donald Trump is able to walk in one door in the courthouse and out of the other. And that's not because his crimes lack seriousness, right?
That's right. Come
on.
That
is because he is being treated in a differential way for one, political reasons, and two, because of privilege, and three, and most importantly, because we have a system that is geared toward facilitating the easy overcoming of justice by people like him.
And I like for you to flush that out about the severity of his charges, because I think that I think this is where the disconnect comes with society when it comes to rich people. Both of us, we can be charged with the same crime, but based on the economics, their crime is not looked at as being as severe, albeit the same crime, because of them being rich. Why did you say that it's not because of the severity of the crime? Flush that out a little bit.
So I'll say, if we look at someone like Donald Trump's case, and not only with the DOJ, but his cases back in New York, he was someone who was just found liable of sexual assault.
Right.
Any person of color that had sexually assaulted a woman in a dressing room would be sitting in jail, but he walked free, right? In New York, at the same time where police and politicians across New York State are attacking bail reforms. I didn't hear any of those organizations or people attack Donald Trump's unconditional release from federal custody over very, very serious crimes that could compromise the integrity of our national security, right? There are even reports out that the increase in the loss of covert agents throughout his presidency can be linked to his handling and mishandling of classified information and documents. So we are potentially talking about people having lost their lives, service to this country, because of someone's egotistic, irrational, and what may be self-serving, remains to be seen as the case develops, conduct, right? But he is out, he is free, he is in Florida, comfortable with his family, while there are thousands of people charged with lesser crimes, right? Let alone sexual assault, who are sitting on Rikers Island or in jails across this country. And so what we really, really see is that whether or not someone is remanded to jail is disconnected from what they have done.
Right. And you know what? And I like that that articulation, right? Because when we talk about the severity of the crime, we have Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in the 50s. They was executed for the same crime that Donald Trump is charged with. Then we had Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, who was vilified. Nixon had his office broken into to stop him from publishing documents relative to the United States imperialist aggression in Vietnam. But Donald Trump get the full penalty of the law and the full penalty and benefits of his privilege. Talk about how people on Rikers Island, because you briefly talked about this process where in terms of a person charged with a less severe crime, inability to pay the bail, has to go through what they have to go through in terms of like the same, being under the same or so-called same system, what they go through in terms of their process. Talk about that.
I just want to be clear, we're not only talking about Donald Trump, but people like him, right?
That's
With
right. That's right.
individuals like, Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's been accused of widespread, inappropriate behavior with minors and prostitutes. We are talking about the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, as well as the companies themselves that regularly pollute our rivers, right?
Yeah,
that
right.
burn trains and burn toxic material that is carcinogenic. We are talking about the pollution of our air, right? Air pollution in this country harms and kills far more people than homicides every year. But
That's
we are
right.
not having a conversation about that with relation to criminal justice. We are not prosecuting those companies. And so when we start having a conversation that focuses on harm rather than crime and criminality, it changes our lens and perspective. So I just want to be clear,
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Donald Trump is just a really, really egregious example, right, of the differential treatment that the justice system in this country has for people of power and privilege versus those who are trapped on Rikers Island, right? If you're looking at someone who's arrested in New York City, right? I was just reading an article the other day about a young man, Manuel Morales in Brownsville, who went to throw some trash in a trash can, missed the bin. Several police officers jumped out of an undercover car, confronted him, tackled him, bloodied him, arrested him. He was put in jail for having made a mistake.
Yeah.
And so this is the type of casual brutality that happens at the level of policing in places like New York City and all over the country, in the sort of senseless ways in which people of color land on Rikers Island and are incarcerated. But when we look at the severity of harm caused by major corporations, by people like Donald Trump, they often walk away with just a fine, right? And again, we have one system of justice in this country that is really functioning to the benefit of those it has been meant to protect, right? We have a system of justice that is protecting a criminal. Like
right, and you know what? And I like to highlight this point about the observation you made about when we focus on the crime and not focus on
the harm,
the person, right? When we focus on love, the EPA came into existence as a result of what they call Love Canal, where there was toxic waste and it was polluting a particular part of this country, and it was killing the people that was drinking the water. Or we look at Michigan, Flint, Michigan, where we have the pollution of the water, and poor people are being highly affected by it, but yet the corporations that's responsible and the corporate figures that's responsible for, they're not indicted, such as in the case of Donald Trump. You made the observation, which was very astute, that because of his behavior, citizens of the United States have been killed. You can trace a lot of the collateral damage to national security to Donald Trump's sheer disregard for national security. But yet, at the same token, like you said, he had someone locked up for having a felony and voting. What was the severity of that crime? Exercising your right as a citizen, or like that one vote. And they say, well, one vote might not make a difference, but in the landscape of things, the probability of that one vote changing the political landscape at that point in time was slim to none.
And let's just think about the optics of that, right? You can incite a riot on Capitol Hill and try to overturn an election, a free and fair election. I really want to emphasize that point. But you can't mistakenly cast a ballot as a Black person in this country who has a felony, right? That is a systemic problem, right? The fact that there are over 1 million people in this country that have been felony disenfranchised is not a mistake. It is a mechanism of voter suppression. The prosecution of Crystal Mason was an instrument of voter suppression. But people like Donald Trump and those who collaborated with him could, on live TV, on CNN, on MSNBC, incite a riot, cause great harm. Several people were killed on Capitol Hill that day.
Exactly.
Walked away with their hands clean. And so we do not have justice is not blind in this country. It is not fair. I don't know if it ever will be. And I have no hope that if Donald Trump is convicted, that somehow vindicates the system, because it doesn't, right? The evidence against the system is damning. The system should be on trial alongside Donald Trump.
Right. And you know what? And when they had this thing happen at the Capitol, I was thinking about the Puerto Rican nationalists, Lolita Lebron and them back in the 60s. They just went in the Capitol and shot a gun up in the air and their whole thing was they wanted independence for Puerto Rico. They wanted Puerto Rico to stop being a colony of the United States. That's the only crime they committed. And they was given life. Donald Trump incited a riot, and they changed the narrative. And this is another part of this draconian system that we call justice. He incited a riot. They go down there, it's an insurrection. They're trying to overthrow the government. They change it and say, they change the whole language. Oh, it's not a riot, it's not an insurrection, it's a protest. They exercise their rights to protest. And in that regard, we find, to go back to your point, we find that it is number one system, and it's the system that represents that's there primarily for the benefit of the corporate America, capitalism, imperialism, and fascism. When it comes to poor and oppressed people, we always want to find ourselves in Rikers Island. I can't pay 10% of $1,000. I'm in Rikers Island because I threw trash out and missed the trash can. And because you beat me half to death, now you have to arrest me and justify this brutality you give me. So now you give me a bunch of fabricated charges. And at the end of the process, when I come to court, I'm already like in a whirlpool of other people that's coming to court. It's one public defender got 200, 300 people on their cases. So they pretty much are like speedballing when it comes down to the process. But talk about what do we have to do to like get people to understand this narrative that we outlining, that it's only one justice system, and that's a system that represents the have, and it's a system against the have-nots.
I think we have to become more sophisticated in our analysis, right? At base, right? We have to understand that we have a legal system in this country that is not concerned with public safety, that is not concerned with crime prevention, that is not even concerned with reducing harm, but it is geared towards reinforcing the status quo, right? And the status quo is Black and brown bodies brutalized by police, imprisoned and warehoused by the system, right? Sometimes, and in some states, just to create jobs in failing farm communities or white people, right? I think a lot of us hear or have heard about, coal towns, right?
Right.
Or factory towns. In the United States, we have prison towns. That is absurd, right?
That's right.
All prisons are for profit. And I think, with respect to our analysis becoming more sophisticated, we need to make a important distinction between crime and illegality, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of things that are illegal that all types of people do in this society. Only certain segments of the population are actually criminalized for those things.
Right.
And these individuals are overwhelmingly Black and white. And so when we step back and we start looking at the data, right, when we start understanding how the system is functioning, right, it behooves us to start taking on and confronting those popular narratives, right? What happened on January 6th is the system communicating to all Americans that it is okay for some people to be violent, that is okay for some people to try to overthrow and subvert an election, right? But it's not okay for others, right? The elephant in the room is race, because we know just in the summer of 2020, when we had Black Lives Matters marches through DC, they wheeled out the Army and the National Guard, and
Right.
Capitol steps looked like, the U.S. was invading a foreign country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those troops were nowhere to be found on January 6th, and that was not by happenstance.
That's right.
Right. And so we really not only have to become more sophisticated in our analysis, we have to become more sophisticated as well in countering disinformation, at calling out the bigotry and hypocrisy, but also mobilizing our communities around this type of rabid injustice, right? We really, really got to get people voting along the lines of their sense of morality and justice, and not only whether or not they're going to have a job tomorrow, whether or not they're going to have health care, because all of these things, especially in Black and brown communities, are inextricably bound to social and racial justice.
That's right. And I like that observation, because when we look at the political landscape as it exists now, right, and we know now that Donald Trump is running again, and he has this mannerism of political discourse that borderlines on insanity, but yet everybody that's in that arena is scared or reluctant to challenge him or call him out on it. And then when they do call him out, they become more insane in their counter. So we're, and the public and people of color are in the middle, because at the end of the process, it don't make no difference if it's a Democrat. I think Malcolm said this clear: a Democrat or a Republican in there, they're both the same. Because we're talking about Hunter Biden in one regard, right? And we talking about Donald Trump in another regard. And both of them, it shows that the scales of justice, as they weigh out, Hunter Biden right here, Donald Trump right here, the scales is balanced. You take Hunter Biden off, and you put a poor Black and oppressed person on the scale, and the scales become imbalanced. Tell us, how can we get in touch with you? How can our listeners and viewers get in touch with you or stay in touch with what you're doing?
I think the best way to find me and follow what I'm up to and the things that I care about is on Twitter. And so that's just my first name, last name on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find. So DYJUAN TATRO on Twitter.
All right, thank you, Dyjuan. There you have it, the real news. Rattling the bars. Dyjuan, you rattled the bars today. We definitely created the climate for people to start looking at the political landscape and the criminal injustice system. Here at the real news and Rattling the Bars, you only get this kind of information. You're not going to get this kind of discourse on main media. As you can see, Hunter Biden is pleading guilty to a series of offense. Donald Trump has been charged with a series of offense, and no one is talking about why they're still walking around. But yet you go on Rikers Island, and you have people over there dying day in and day out, and no one is talking about that neither. Only you're hearing about these things on Rattling the Bar. We ask you to continue to support Rattling the Bars and the real news, because you know what? At the end of the day, we are actually the real news. Thank you very much. Continue to support us.
Thank you so much for watching The Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to The Real News Network. Solidarity forever.